The last time I cried was the night they took everything from me: my home, my name, my dignity. I made myself one promise in that empty room. I would not shed another tear until they were the ones on their knees. That promise changed everything. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who was supposed to love you, stay until the end, because this story will hit different. Hit that like button, subscribe, and don't you dare skip a second. Before I became dangerous, I was just grateful. Grateful for the small things, grateful for the smell of roses in the early morning, for the way the dew sat on the petals before the sun burned it off. I grew up on a flower farm, my grandmother's farm, deep in the countryside where nobody was rich, but everybody had enough. Grandma Rose ran that place with her bare hands and a spine made of iron. She didn't talk much, but when she did, every word landed like it had been sitting inside her for years, just waiting for the right moment to come out. She raised me after my parents left. Not dramatically, not in one big moment. They just sort of drifted away the way some people do. And Grandma Rose caught me before I hit the ground. She put me to work in those fields, not to punish me, but because she believed that a person who knows how to grow something from dirt will never feel completely powerless. I didn't understand that then. I do now. I wasn't supposed to stay in that town forever. I had a gift, an eye for space, for color, for the way a room could make a person feel something without a single word being spoken. Interior design was my language. I scraped together enough to get a certificate, then a small portfolio, then a job, a real one, at a firm that handled hotel renovations in the city. I was 24, underpaid, overworked, and the happiest I had ever been. That was when Victor walked in. He was everything I had never seen up close before. Polished, older, commanding. He smelled expensive. He looked at a room the way I did, like he was reading it. He was overseeing a property acquisition connected to the hotel we were redesigning, and somewhere between the third and fourth walkthrough of the lobby, he stopped and looked at me, not through me, not past me, and said, "You have a rare eye for beauty." I was gone, completely, embarrassingly gone. We were married within a year, and I want to be honest with you because this story deserves honesty. Those first months were real, or at least they felt real. He made me feel chosen, seen, like all those years of being quiet and small and easy to overlook had finally been noticed by someone who mattered. I mistook being chosen for being loved. That is a mistake I will never make again. But slowly, and this is the part nobody warned you about because it doesn't happen overnight, slowly I started disappearing. It wasn't dramatic. There was no single moment I could point to and say that was when it started. It was small things. He'd introduce me at dinner parties as my wife and move on before I could say my own name. He'd suggest I drop a client project because it conflicted with a trip he'd planned. He'd look at my design sketches and say, "Isn't this a bit much for a hobby?" A hobby. 5 years of training and a career I had built from nothing. A hobby? I painted over myself to match his walls. And the worst part? I told myself it was love. I told myself that supporting his life was my life. I believed it. Then Grandma Rose died. She went quietly, the way she had lived. No fuss, no drama, just there one day and gone the next. I got the call on a Tuesday morning. I told Victor. He looked up from his laptop, said he was sorry, and then said, and I remember this word for word, "The Hargrove deal closes Friday. I can't disappear right now. You understand." I went to her funeral alone. I stood at her grave in the same coat I'd worn on our first date because I realized standing there that I didn't even own clothes that were fully mine anymore. Everything in my wardrobe had been selected, suggested, or paid for by Victor. Even that felt like a theft I hadn't noticed happening. After the service, the lawyer handed me a small envelope. Inside was a letter in Grandma Rose's handwriting and a folded legal document I didn't understand yet. The letter said, "You were never meant to shrink, my love. Everything I planted for you. When the time comes, you'll know what to do with it. I wept in that car for an hour. It was the last time. When I came home, the apartment was quiet. Victor wasn't there, and on the bathroom counter, sitting next to my moisturizer like it belonged there, was a perfume bottle. Not mine. I picked it up. Expensive. Floral, but sharp, like something trying too hard to seem soft. I set it back down. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, and something inside me went very, very still. I want you to understand something. When people talk about the moment they found out their partner was cheating, they always describe falling apart, screaming, crying, shattering. But for me, it was the opposite. It was like the last piece of noise inside me finally went quiet. And in that silence, I could suddenly think with perfect clarity. I didn't confront him that night. I waited. I watched. Over the next 3 weeks, I found everything. Hotel receipts, a second phone he kept in his car, dinner reservations for 2 at restaurants he told me were client meetings. Her name was Celeste, his business partner. Polished, sharp, the kind of woman who walks into a room and immediately starts calculating who's useful to her. But the affair was almost the small thing, because buried inside his desk, in a folder I found while he was traveling, was something far worse. Victor had been quietly moving our joint assets into a shell company. Bank transfers, property titles, investment accounts, all being rerouted slowly, carefully over 18 months. The shell company was registered under Celeste's name. He wasn't just cheating on me, he had been systematically robbing me. And when he was done, he was going to hand me divorce papers and walk away with everything, while I had nothing to show for 5 years of my life. I confronted him on a Thursday evening. I had the folder. He didn't deny it. He didn't even flinch. He just looked at me with this flat, almost bored expression and said, "You were never a partner, sweetheart. You were an image, and images get replaced." Celeste was sitting on our couch. She smiled at me, not cruelly, just indifferently, the way you smile at something that is no longer relevant. Victor slid the divorce papers across the table, already prepared, already signed on his end. I was to receive nothing, no assets, no claim on the properties, no acknowledgement of the years I had given, just a signature line and a suitcase. I took the suitcase. I walked out. I did not cry. Something in me didn't shatter, it crystallized. I slept on my friend Delia's couch for 6 weeks. Delia, loyal, fierce, the kind of friend who asks no questions and makes no judgments and simply shows up with food and silence when you need both. She gave me her spare key and didn't push. I am grateful for her in ways I'll never fully be able to say. Those first weeks were brutal. I had no income, no savings in my own name, and a career gap of 5 years that I had to explain without sounding like a victim. I would lie awake at night replaying every moment, every small erosion, every time I said yes, of course, when I should have said absolutely not. And then one night, somewhere around week 3, I pulled on my coat to go for a walk and felt something in the pocket. The letter. Grandma Rose's letter. I read it again, standing under a streetlight, and then I unfolded the legal document the lawyer had tucked inside the envelope. I had glossed over it at the funeral, too raw to absorb anything, but this time I read every line. It was a trademark registration, filed decades ago, renewed consistently, still active. Grandma Rose had spent years perfecting a rose extraction formula, a cold press technique that produced an extract of unusual purity and depth. She had used it in the lotions and soaps she sold at the local market. What she had never told me, what she had apparently told no one, was that she had quietly, carefully filed that formula as a protected trademark in my name. She had made me the sole owner before I was even old enough to understand what that meant. I stood under that streetlight for a long time. The next day, I called a small intellectual property firm. A young lawyer named Anna took my case on a modest retainer that I paid for by selling the last piece of jewelry Victor had given me, which felt like a perfect use for it. Anna started digging. What she found over the next 2 months made us both go quiet. 3 luxury fragrance houses had been using a rose extract in their signature lines that bore a chemical fingerprint nearly identical to Grandma Rose's formula, not inspired by it, using it, sourced through a supply chain that traced back to a processor who had obtained the formula without authorization years ago. And one of those fragrance houses was directly connected to Celeste's business portfolio, the same Celeste who was now living in my apartment. I said nothing publicly. I just let Anna document everything. Around this time, I attended a small industry event, a gathering of fragrance and luxury goods professionals that Delia had encouraged me to go to, mostly just to get out of the apartment and remember that I still existed. That night, I met Conrad. Conrad was older, sharp-eyed, and carried the specific kind of stillness that belongs to people who have already survived their worst moment. He had been a significant player in luxury real estate and branded goods until Victor, through a carefully orchestrated smear campaign 7 years ago, had effectively pushed him out of the industry. He had spent years rebuilding quietly. He had resources, he had connections, and he had every reason in the world to want Victor exposed. We talked for 3 hours. When I left that night, I didn't have a plan yet, but I had a partner. Over the next 18 months, I built. Not loudly, not publicly. I launched a boutique fragrance brand based on the legitimate licensed use of Grandma Rose's trademarked formula. I called it Rosa Firma, firm rose, rooted rose, a rose that doesn't bend. Conrad provided the capital. I provided the product, the vision, the design sensibility that Victor called a hobby. Delia handled the marketing. Anna handled the legal architecture. We didn't chase press. We didn't announce ourselves. We simply made something so exceptional that it moved on its own. Within 14 months, Rosa Firma was carried by 3 major luxury retailers. The products sold out within weeks of each launch. And quietly, in parallel, Anna's cease and desist letters began landing on the desks of the companies that had been using the formula without license, including Celeste's connected brand. One morning, my phone rang. I looked at the screen. Victor. I let it ring twice before I answered. His voice was different, tighter, stripped of that casual confidence I had spent years trying to earn approval from. He said, "We need to talk. Someone is dismantling everything I've built, and I think it's you." I said, "I'll see you Thursday. My office." I want you to picture this moment. The man who handed me a suitcase and told me I was just an image walking into the office of the company I built from a letter in a coat pocket and a formula my grandmother protected for me in secret. He walked in expecting the version of me he had discarded. He found someone else entirely. He tried everything. Charm first, that warm, practiced smile that had once made me feel like the most important person in the room, then negotiation, then, when neither worked, a quiet threat about what he could do to slow down my company's growth if I didn't back off. I let him finish. Then I slid a folder across the desk. Inside was everything. The documented asset transfers during our divorce, now in the hands of a financial crimes attorney, the shell company, the 18 months of systematic fraud, and then something more, because Conrad, it turned out, had not just been an ally, he had been a witness. Years ago, Conrad had been present at a private meeting where Victor had outlined his method for asset concealment. He had kept records, quietly, patiently, the way you keep a document you know you will need someday. He had handed all of it to Anna 6 months before Victor ever called me. Victor looked at the folder for a long time. Then he looked at me. And for the first time in all the years I had known him, he had nothing to say. What followed wasn't dramatic. It never is in real life. It was litigation.
public filings, the slow unwinding of a financial structure built on fraud. Victor's holdings began to collapse under scrutiny. Celeste, true to who she was, cut ties with him immediately and completely, issuing a public statement about having been unaware of any irregularities. She abandoned him the exact same way he had abandoned me, and I will admit that watching that happen felt like closing a window I had forgotten to shut. Celeste Brands settled with us. The check they wrote was made out to Rosa Firma. I framed the copy. But none of that, not the settlement, not Victor's collapse, not the recognition the brand was receiving, none of it was the moment that broke me open. That came later, quietly, the way the most important things always do. A journalist was writing a profile on Rosa Firma and had traced the origin of the formula back to the farm. During our interview, almost as an aside, she mentioned that the land itself had an interesting ownership history, that it had been sold off once decades ago and then purchased again at auction by a private trust. She had found this while researching the brand's background and thought I might want to know. I asked her the name of the trust. She told me. It was mine. It had always been mine. Grandma Rose, decades ago, before I was even born, had gone back and bought the land the family had lost. She had registered it under a private trust with me as the sole beneficiary. She had never told me. She just quietly, patiently planted it into my future like a seed she knew I would find when I was ready for it. The farm was mine. The roses were mine. Everything she had built in silence, every early morning, every careful renewal of that trademark, every document filed and protected and handed forward, had been for me. She knew. She had always known who I would become. She just waited for me to know it too. I drove out to the farm on a Sunday morning. I walked through the fields alone. The roses were still growing, tended now by a small local family we'd hired through the estate. I knelt at her grave and placed a single stem, still carrying the dew from the morning. I didn't cry. Not because I was hard, but because I was finally, completely full. They called me broken. They called me replaceable. One of them even called me dangerous toward the end, and he meant it as an insult, like dangerous was something to be ashamed of. I took it as a crown, because dangerous means you finally stopped apologizing for how much space you deserve to take up. Dangerous means you kept the promise you made to yourself in an empty room on the worst night of your life. Dangerous means you became, quietly and completely, someone that silence could not swallow. I didn't get revenge. I got free. And free, it turns out, is so much more permanent. If this story hit you somewhere deep, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Hit that subscribe button because we tell the stories nobody else dares to. And drop in the comments, what was the moment in this story that broke you open? I read every single one.